Okay, let's discuss panel discussion. Let's start the panel discussion. First, I'd like to introduce Daniel Kotoke-san, your friend, your partner, and Nobuyuki Hayashi-san, and Kazutoshi Otani-san. Please come in.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Bill-san. Hi, Dan-san. Hi, Nobu-san.
Hello there.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. First, Daniel-san, please give us your comments. Daniel, put on your speaker. Mike. Okay. Hi.
Well, that's a broad question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Always
Yeah. Yeah.
So what I was wondering is, Bill, were you the high school class of '72? You graduated at the same time as Steve. So
as Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak graduated the year before Jobs and I got in.
So were you invited to be a part of the famous prank for graduation of the middle finger salute? Were you part of that?
No, I was too conservative for that.
Just wondering.
Good question, though.
It was called Swab Job, right?
Yes, Steve Wozniak and Alan Baum. Alan Baum was one of Steve Wozniak's friends. So that was Swab, S-W-A-B, and then Job was Steve Jobs. So.
Right. As a related question, you know, the couple years that I was close with Steve at Reed, I never heard him mention blue boxes at all. Did you have any involvement with the Blue Box project? I'll just add, it took me a long time to figure out when that had happened. That was during your senior year, 1971, right? Early spring of '72.
Probably, yeah.
Did you participate in that at all?
Well, Woz came over and showed me the Esquire article, and this was all very exciting and interesting as a technical challenge. So we both started trying to design the circuitry, and I was using something called phase-locked loops, and Woz was using a crystal and digital techniques, and he finished first, and his was better, so I just dropped my project, And
oh, okay, that's a good story.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. Draper tells the story that Woz's version was inferior because it was square waves and not filtered properly.
Woz was really great at doing digital stuff that worked well in an analog world, even though it didn't follow all the analog rules. But it worked, and it worked reliably and better than other stuff. So who cares if it follows the analog rules? If it works better and it's cheaper to build, do it.
Right.
Besides, all those digital edges, the square wave edges, get filtered out by the phone system, which can only go up to 3 kilohertz. So it turns everything into sine waves, or approximately, regardless if you're feeding it square waves.
You're right. That's a good point. I never thought of that.
Okay.
I'll just add, I never understood how the Blue Box the whole scheme worked until I became a telecom engineer myself in the late 90s. And that was just a fascinating thing to learn about. Long after it didn't work anymore. It didn't work by the late 70s, I think.
Yeah. Well, here's an interesting side thing. When the long distance control technology was developed, there was no security on it. And when Internet of Things technology, smart home technology, smart doorbells, smart door locks, and so forth are being developed, a lot of it is being developed without much security. And that's bad.
Yeah, that's bad.
Eventually, people like Woz figured out how to hack the phone system, and eventually the phone companies decided to add security.
Mhm.
So all of you who are consumers of new things like Alexa and Siri and so forth, these smart speakers that are talking to the internet, and you have your smart doorbells and your smart cameras and so forth, you know, you've seen the stories about people who put in a camera in their infant's nursery so the parents can monitor their infants, and then hackers discover them, and there's no security, so the hacker gets in and starts making obscene sounds and obscene words, you know, to the infants, or starts playing back the video of your private home on the internet because there's no security. So all of you should be very afraid, and should all investigate whatever technology you buy to make sure they have adequate security on it.
Yeah. Okay.
So
How
in that
about-
connection,
Yeah.
I think Apple just announced coming out with the VPN product, right?
I haven't seen that,
Virtual private.
so I'll have to look.
That was part of the announcement a few weeks ago.
Oh,
I think that's a very shrewd idea.
Okay.
okay. So next, Hayashi-san, please
Yeah.
give us your point.
Yeah, I really liked your expression, the product for soul. But I've been covering the tech industry for 30 years now, and not many people in the tech industry understands the value of tech, product for soul, or they are more techy and they are more left brain people. And I was wondering if everyone at Apple gets it, or at least in the Macintosh group, everyone gets the importance of making product for soul rather than very technical gadgets.
Well, it's easy when you have 10 people working together on something to instill a particular culture.
Yeah.
So when we were the Macintosh group and we had 5, 10, 20 people, it was easy to hire those people who were similar, of like mind, and who could get on board with your vision and your feeling and your goals. And you could hire artists, you could hire engineers, technologists who wanted to create art rather than simple technology. But when you grow to a company of tens of thousands of employees, no, they're not all going to get it.
Yeah.
And when you hire managers from and vice presidents from other companies, they're not going to get it. And when you have to build the second, third, fourth, fifth version of a product line, not everyone's going to get it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, for example, in the time of Macintosh System 7, that we were working on the 7th major version of the operating system, we hired a vice president to run part of engineering, software engineering, from another company. He was very good at managing software and software development. But he would say, we have to develop the next big thing. We can't just do more of the same. We have to do the next big thing, the thing that changes the paradigm, that changes the world. And I would tell him, you don't get it. Nobody knows what the next big thing is. But I can tell you 10 things that if you did these 10 simple things to the Macintosh operating system, the net result would elevate it enough that people would say, whoa, Apple has done the next big thing.
Yeah, that's the right order of things.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, yesterday actually I was on a video. There was an online viewing of the movie General Magic, and have you seen the movie?
I haven't seen the movie. No.
Yeah, but it's basically all the original Macintosh team building General Magic, and the product failed, but actually Tony Fadell, the guy who made iPod and iPhone, was originally General Magic, yes. And also Andy Haskell, Andy Rubin, the father of Android, also was working for General Magic. So basically, 98% of smartphones today came out from the failure of General Magic. That's basic concept of the movie. But back in the mid-90s, there were many big projects like Intelligent, Collider, and how do you look back? Do you think all those big dreams and big bangs were worth it, or how do you look back at the mid-90s movement?
Well, let me answer a slightly different question.
Yeah.
In the technology field, you have hundreds or thousands of people around the world doing stuff, trying to make products, having ideas, and trying to bring their ideas to life.
Yeah.
And some of them they all have dreams of some kind. Some of them have developed new technologies or new thoughts or new ideas or new ways of doing things. Some just want to use the technology that's already known to do wonderful new things. Okay. And there are many, many trials that all, if you look back at the history of technology, you find that there were a lot of people trying to do what we called personal digital assistants, little rectangular things that would have contacts and calendars and so forth. And they had many trials. I had one by Casio that worked pretty well. And then there was the Palm Pilot, which was one of the first that was really popular. And there was the Apple Newton that failed, but had wonderful ideas in it, wonderful dreams. General Magic was in a way like that. It wasn't until years later when certain technologies were developed enough, like powerful low power processors, like cheap high density RAM, like cheap small batteries and so forth. And in addition, lots of trials at developing software for graphics, for handwriting recognition, for internet and networking software, and many trials and failures in all of these different areas until finally technology was developed enough and some company was successful at integrating them together. And then we remember that as the product that changed the world, when really there were 20 other products that were attempting to change the world. When the Apple I and Apple II were developed, we had multiple other computers, personal computers being developed, and it wasn't clear which would win. The processor technology saw, the Commodore PET, for example. Eventually the Radio Shack TRS-80, okay? Who knew that Apple would be the one with the Apple II that would ultimately become the most successful and would become the icon in this stage in development? It could have been the processor technology saw. It could have been the Commodore PET. But with a combination of marketing and engineering and distribution and all of the pieces with the right combination, Apple was able to win and become the iconic product of that era. Okay?
And Steve Jobs certainly had influence, in making people realize the value of that.
Yeah, he had a lot of influence on getting people, both in marketing and engineering and development and manufacturing. He had a lot of influence on getting all those people to do the right things.
Okay,
Another thing you don't realize was Apple always had a very strong legal department. Very strong, very aggressive legal department. And one never thinks about how much the strength of their legal department and the aggressiveness of their legal department had to do with the ultimate success of Apple. Okay? And yet without it, they would have lost a lot of patent battles, a lot of product battles and so forth. They would not have been able to succeed as they have. So you never hear about the legal department. And yet that was one of the many things that Apple did well and was pivotal to their success.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Maybe it's time for Otani-san.
Otani-san, please.
Okay. Yeah, that was very interesting and exciting because you and Dan-san was at the point of revolution. And actually, and especially for Shinhanga, that's interesting because Takagi-san, would you please allow me to share my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, just a little bit. Yeah. I want to show something. Not yet.
Please.
Did
share.
you? Oh, okay, I tried. Okay, yeah. Let's see. Okay. And can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It's a gallery called Shokando in Gion, Kyoto. The master of this gallery once told me that one day Steve and his wife visited his gallery and purchased 1 million yen of art piece. And he wanted to actually hire an artist to decorate his own house in Silicon Valley. But artist refused it because he didn't understand English and cannot speak or cannot communicate with him. But when I heard about that, I was very impressed, and Steve likes the old Japanese art and hanga. So this is very interesting. And I have actually 5 questions for you. Takagi-san, can I take some time to ask him?
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
So the first one is using a scale of 1 to 10. How do you evaluate Steve as a friend, leader, business person, and visionary? How do you evaluate him?
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a very, very difficult.
No, this is fine. Part of the answer is that his abilities changed over time.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone looks at the Steve Jobs who died, but never the Steve Jobs who was born. An infant can do nothing. An infant is helpless.
Yes.
Okay. An adolescent is clueless about life. Okay. You know, when he was in his teens or early 20s with Daniel Kotke, he went off to India in search of enlightenment or some semblance of it, right? So he didn't know what he wanted to do. He didn't have the answers then. So we look at him when he died and say, look how great he was. Was he always like that? Well, no one's always like that. You grow and develop over time. So as a friend, I would say 10. Steve was one of my oldest and best friends ever. Okay, and we loved each other throughout our lives and to the end. As a leader, that changed.
Yes.
You know, he was an indifferent leader at some time, a poor leader at others, a good leader at others. He ended up being an excellent leader in a particular area.
Yeah.
Now, he would not have been a good leader of getting volunteers to work together in a national organization for healthcare relief, or to vaccinate people, or or to do healthcare for the impoverished or something. He would not be a good leader for getting volunteers like that, socially conscious people, to work together in that. But within the narrow area of being a technology leader, where he understood the business, he understood what drives technology and how it works and so forth, he became excellent. As a business person, that also changed. Although in high school, I always thought, you know, he could grow up to be a good businessman because he knows how to buy things cheap and sell them for more. And I remember he at a garage sale or a yard sale, he found a nice receiver, an amplifier, preamplifier, speakers, radio, all built into one that you would plug in and hook up to speakers and a phonograph turntable, and you could the receiver was the heart of a stereo system. And he found one and bought it cheap, and he fixed a little bit that was wrong with it. It was actually the headphone jack. A wire had come loose, and he fixed that. And now he had, he'd bought it for like $10, and now he had something that would have cost like a couple $100. He somehow was able to end up with a really wonderful TIAC open reel tape deck. This was before cassettes were popular, and certainly before CDs. And I said, how did he get this thing that we would have loved to have had, this beautiful TIAC tape deck? And eventually he had an Otari tape deck. You know, how did he get these? You know, so his ability to negotiate and get things cheap and then sell them for more was part of what made Apple successful. He was able to convince companies to sell a guy in t-shirts and sneakers, or actually sandals, with long hair, parts for his first and then second batch of computers. He was able to convince them that he was legitimate, even though he looked like a hippie. Okay? Yeah. So, you know, that's part of being a good businessman. It's convincing people that you can do business. As a visionary, again, that changed, but the sense of having imagination and wanting to do something more, wanting to do something great, wanting to do something that grabs people's attention and that affects them is a desire he always had. And I think his ability to be a visionary developed again over the years. And it's important to notice it wasn't always him. He did not envision the iPod. He found it. Okay. He did not envision the 3.5-inch micro floppy drive for the Macintosh. His engineers found it. Okay. Like many entrepreneurs, he was the champion of ideas once he had adopted the ideas. But he would fight those ideas until you convinced him. And then he would flip, and he would become such a champion, he would treat it as if he had the idea himself. Because that is the nature of a good entrepreneur. Okay. So oftentimes, he would hire the best people, and eventually his best people would beat him into submission on this idea, and then he would become the champion of it. And because he always he often became a champions of successful ideas, we think he's a visionary. Well, what about the Apple Cube? Apple Cube was a beautiful computer, but it failed. So was he a visionary? Well, yes. Are visionaries always successful? No. You can have a wonderful vision and you can execute beautifully and still succeed, even though you're visionary. So when people say Steve is a visionary, what they really mean is that he was successful. And ultimately, his successes far outweighed his failures.
Yeah, true. Does Daniel have any opposition or addition to this, to Bill?
No, that was very well said, Bill. I would just add that Steve was really outstanding at putting a face to Apple. Kind of his personal marketing style, which I think he got partly from Andy Grove at Intel, or possibly Dave Packard. But anyway, he used that approach to huge success. He kind of became a cult hero. And I can remember Steve telling me way back before Apple started, he said, if I ever become a guru, just shoot me.
I see. Okay.
Last time you said, Daniel, you said you are very impressed by TIAC product. Is that right? Daniel-san, please. You met at Reed College. At first, he had a TIAC tape recorder and Bob Dylan and so on. That's right?
Yes, yes. And at the time, I wasn't an audiophile, so I wasn't really curious. But then in retrospect, I thought, oh, that's a multi-$1,000 item. Where did you get that?
Yeah, where did he get that?
But the interesting anecdote, which you might know about, Bill, is in the Jobs movie lore, Steve Jobs is always arguing for Bob Dylan, and Steve Wozniak is arguing for the Beatles, right? I think that was a scene in the movie. But what Woz said was, no, Woz was the person who brought Steve Jobs to the record place in Berkeley where he could buy bootleg copies of the Bob Dylan. Woz was a big fan of Dylan also.
Woz used to take me to the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, SLAC, to the technical library, where the door was not locked, to use a large Xerox machine to make copies of the Bob Dylan songbook.
Wow.
That was Woz, not Jobs.
Actually, Woz brought his book to that place to just go copy it.
Yeah, he
Just
took
brought...
the Bob Dylan songbook with the music, and so you could play the guitar. You needed to know the words and the melody and the chords. So and we were poor because we were just kids. So what do? You find a way to get a free copy. Yeah.
I see.
It is the very place where the Homebrew Computing Club was taking place, right?
I think so.
SLAC?
Yeah, at SLAC. Yeah.
I think they tore that building down a couple years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Could be.
Wow.
All right.
Okay.
Otani-san, did you have another slide there?
Yes. My second question is, how do you see the Tim Cook, the current CEO of Apple, and Steve once said that Tim Cook is not a personal product. He is good at maybe the manufacturing or controlling things, but not a person of product. How do you see Tim Cook as a successor to Steve?
Well, I don't know Tim Cook.
But not
so
personally,
I have.
But,
so all
outside.
I can do is look at Apple, and Apple seems to be doing pretty well.
Yes, definitely.
Now, will it continue to do pretty well? I don't know.
Nobody knows.
In another 5 years, will there be a new visionary product? That's different than everything else. I don't know.
I see.
Tim Cook may have learned from Steve to hire the best people and manage them well so they produce wonderful work. And if he's learned that, then maybe Apple will be in good shape for the next 20 years.
And actually, Steve advised him not to copy his style or his way of business. So think or do what you think correct. So I think that's the best advice for him, for Tim Cook.
I think that's good advice for anyone. Be true to yourself.
I see. And what is the most favorite product of Apple right now?
The most favorite to whom? To me?
Yes, for you. The Macintosh or iPad, iPhone, Apple Watch.
Sometimes people say, what's your favorite movie? What's your favorite book? What's your favorite food?
It's very difficult.
I don't have favorites, but I can tell you that every day I use, many times, every day I use iPhones and Macintoshes.
I see.
Just so like those are the most useful products.
That's correct. Okay, so my third question is, what would you do if you weren't working for Apple then? So maybe just continue working for NASA or
or Hewlett Packard, or I was highly employable in my field. So and there are no end of technology companies.
Right.
And indeed, when I left Apple in 1994, I got 4 really good offers from 4 very interesting companies. So I would just work for another technology company.
I see. Okay. And this is a question for Dan-san also. I saw this picture, and behind Steve, there are several scale models of Japanese anime robots like Gundam. And so this is this kind of hobby. So Steve were interested in, and he actually built those models by himself. Do you know?
Steve never built models.
I see. But likes this kind of thing, the scale models, or
I've
Japanese
never seen
anime?
that in Steve's life, so I don't know where those came from.
Oh, I see.
But I never saw them in his childhood, in his youth, in his high school days, in the Apple garage, in his bedroom at home, in his home in Palo Alto with his wife and kids. I never saw things like that.
I
So
see. Dan-san,
I don't know where those came from.
Dan-san, how about you?
My guess was that they were gifts from somebody.
I see.
I never saw Steve with models either.
I see. So I just wondering.
He could have been sitting in someone else's office, because
yeah,
doesn't look to me like Steve's office.
That was a possibility. Yes.
That doesn't look to me like the way Steve would organize his desk.
I see.
That's nice.
You mean it's too neat? It's too neat and orderly?
No, it's too cluttered.
Too cluttered. So his desk was always cleaned up, or
no, just different.
Just different. I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that I just curious about this picture. Okay. So
this picture was a big buzz, creating a big buzz. Do you know Gundam is a very big otaku anime stuff?
Oh yes. Yeah.
That's why. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Making
That's
a big
why.
noise
Yes.
in Japan. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I liked the Pacific Rim movie. It was Mecha versus Kaiju.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay. So what is your current venture, endeavor, or dreams? Please tell us.
Those are all very different areas. My current venture is I am a freelance user experience architect. I do consulting for companies, and I design software that's user-friendly that their software departments can build.
Yeah.
So, and I'm hoping to retire in a few years and maybe do other things. What is my dream? I have lots of dreams. I'll tell you about a dream I had 4 years ago. I wanted to start my own company to build smart home or home automation products. And I found it very difficult. Well, it was impossible to get funding and very difficult to start a hardware company. Easy to do software. You just sit down at a computer and start writing code. Okay. Now that doesn't mean that programming is easy, but getting started doesn't take much. But to do hardware, you've got to have parts and manufacturing and assembly and engineers and all sorts of stuff. So it's very, very hard to start a hardware product.
Yeah, I know, because recently I interviewed a CEO of iRobot, the Colin Angle, who developed the Roomba. So yeah, that was very interesting story, and my book will be published at the end of this month. And so the hardware company is very difficult, but
yes, very difficult.
Maybe Colin have interest in you, your ability to make good advice, maybe.
And anybody who wants to buy into my vision of making homes wonderful, technology infused with technology that makes their home wonderful to live in, you're welcome to come talk to me and give me lots of money.
I see. So yeah, actually, the Colin's next venture is to make a smart home. So maybe it's a good combination, I think. Okay, so yeah, that's my question for now. So just okay. So
I have a last question. I have a question for Bill.
Yeah.
Bill, so don't you like the idea of a simple, customizable, smart home front end based on HyperCard? Isn't that a great idea?
That's a great idea. Yeah.
HyperCard was a visionary product
Yeah.
in many ways, and it's been highly influential. It's a product that inspired much of what the World Wide Web has become. So there are elements of the HyperCard experience that I think would be good as the basis for a home automation or smart home user interface. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially in the authoring part, is you don't see it anywhere else still. And are you familiar with Project Phoenix? So at the end of the life for HyperCard, there was a team in Apple which was working for a project called Phoenix, which was to make sort of HyperCard stack which is publishable to the web. So they were actually making a web browser plugin. So you can actually, browse through HyperCard stack.
Well, there are companies that have continued the HyperCard legacy, like LiveCode and SuperCard and so forth. But HyperCard, as brilliant as it was at the time, had a number of very serious limitations that make it not appropriate, not powerful and flexible enough for a contemporary product. All these years later. This is like 30 years later, okay? And so there are some ideas and some part of the HyperCard experience that is worth maintaining. But I would use different technology to create contemporary products.
If I may ask questions, I was wondering.
No. Of course, Hayashi-san, yes. Hi, dozo.
Arigatou gozaimasu. No. So Apple is having very famous for having a very good human interface group, and I think that sort of draw a line between Apple and other computer companies. And were you involved in the HI group, very early on, or whose idea was it to start the group?
Well, there wasn't a user interface. We called it human interface at Apple early on. There was, but it always same thing: human interface, user interface, computer human interface, human computer user interface. All of those mean the same thing. We didn't have a recognized specialty in this area until after the Macintosh shipped. So all of the stuff that you see, the windows, the icons, and all that kind of stuff was developed by a team of people that Jobs accumulated to create this product. And they drew upon stuff that was done for Lisa. They drew upon stuff that was done at Xerox PARC and so forth. But all of that stuff was done without user interface designers on the team. It wasn't later until Apple realized it needed to continue this ability to infuse this kind of thinking into products that the idea of specialists just to design human interface rather than to program the software that would create the user interface. It wasn't until later that that specialty became acknowledged as something that Apple needed to have more products that used this kind of thinking. I mean, there's only one Andy Hertzfeld. Okay, there's only one Bill Atkinson. There's only one Susan Kerr. But if you had 30 products and you wanted that kind of thinking and that kind of expertise, well, you find you need some specialists who can specialize in that one area so that the software, the programmers who are not good designers but good at development, or the managers who aren't good at envisioning beauty and elegance and usability, but are able to manage teams of people to produce something, over time you realize you need specialists who can do this part of the overall project. You need designers and programmers and managers and testers and documenters and so forth.
True. And in the mid-90s, Don Norman joins Apple. And how do you think it has changed Apple's view at whatever UX user?
Well, over time things get complicated.
Yeah.
Right. So we had the Macintosh group of maybe 5, 10, 15 people. By the time we shipped the Macintosh, we had 150 people in the Macintosh division, right? Daniel started when there were maybe 5 or 10 people. I started when there were 15 people, okay? And by the time we shipped, we had 150 people for manufacturing, distribution, marketing, sales, human resources, and in addition to the product visionaries, if you will, and the core developers. Then Apple developed a human interface group. Eventually, we developed an advanced research group, an advanced products group, where people would research and experiment, and we hired more kind of academic people to think about ideas and so forth. There was one guy, I forget his name, he was kind of brilliant. He did many different kinds of mice. He did mice with 5 buttons, 10 buttons, 2 wheels, 3 wheels, and he'd build these things and write software to do things on the screen. So he was always trying to think, how could we move the idea of the mouse forward? Now when you have a mouse product, you go to Logitech, you get 2 main buttons, but you also get like 20 buttons hidden around the sides, right? Okay. So, but he was a forerunner in thinking ahead about these things. And as many of the ideas that were thought of by those people in the advanced research group eventually came into Apple products. Many of them didn't, but many of them did. And they had both hardware and software and user interface research. And I think it was those people who got Don Norman to come in as, I think, an Apple fellow and stuff, because he had distinguished himself in the popular literature as a person who talked about usable design and usability in products and so forth. And he was a cognitive psychologist, so he would think about, how does the brain work? How do people interpret what you see and understand it, and so forth, make sense of things? So he kind of brought that, to the table. How much change did he actually have? How much effect? I don't know. I have no way of really identifying, oh, Apple did this because of Don Norman.
Got it. Thanks.
Bill, did you, I know this is a religious question. Did you have a preference for the mouse button topic, 1 button versus 2 buttons versus 3 buttons? So it's hotly debated in the Lisa group. I think Lisa had 3 buttons, right?
Well, I believe that the mice at Xerox PARC that made the star on the Alto had 3 buttons. And Jobs, I understood, I don't know for sure, but I've heard many times, was a big proponent for 1 button, 1 button simplicity. I always thought that was too simple, and that 2 buttons are good. One for all the normal stuff, and the second was for bringing up menus, because you always need menus on things, right?
Right.
Okay. So I'm a big proponent of the 2 buttons, which is kind of how things have come down. Oh, I'll tell you another thing. Here you go. Bill is a visionary designer. Okay. You look at any keyboard. Okay. This is one of Apple's, but on the each side there is a command key, and each side there is an option key. Okay. And each side there's a shift key. Originally, we had the command and the option key on only one side of the keyboard. I felt that they needed to be on both sides. And I rewired a keyboard physically. I cut it apart and I rewired and put the keys in to make a keyboard with the command and the option keys, or Mac and on Windows, like the Alt keys and so forth, on Control and Alt keys on Windows. On both, I made a keyboard with them on both sides, and I wrote a memo with a formal proposal to Macintosh management that we should build keyboards like that, and it was ignored at the time. And 5 years later, like everybody's keyboards, Apple's keyboards, IBM's keyboards, the Windows keyboards, all had the Control keys on both sides, the Command keys, the Alt keys, you know, on both sides of the space bar. You see, so I was ignored first.
And Steve Jobs thought about it for a long time and then decided it was his idea.
Probably, yeah, I don't know. I think I have a copy somewhere of that original memo where I showed the picture I had created using Macintosh graphics of a keyboard with the Command and Option keys on both sides of the space bar. You know?
Your talk about mouse kind of reminded me of, you know, Larry Tesler. He has just passed away this February. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you, this is the event for Steve Jobs, but if you could mention some, you know, memory of Larry.
Well, Larry Tesler was a prominent person at Xerox PARC who worked on the user interface of the Star and Alto, you know, operating systems and their graphical user interface. And Apple hired him to work on the Lisa and eventually the Macintosh. And I remember being in discussions with him, not just me, but, you know, the software group with Larry. You know, originally you had the scroll bar on the side of every window, right, to scroll things up and down. And you had this little thing in the middle, we called it the elevator, that you could grab it and scroll up and down. And you had a little button at the top with an arrow, an up arrow, so you could click on it to get things to go up, and a little at the bottom to click on it and have things go down, right? Well, we had to design that, and we had to say, do you have an arrow at the top and an arrow at the bottom? Do you have two arrows at the top, one going up and one going down? Do you have two arrows on the bottom, one going up and one going down? And when you move this thumb, should the document go down or should it go up? Okay, all of those questions we had to think about. What's the right answer? Okay, and you may recall that originally we said that when the thumb goes down, the document should scroll up because down means I want to see more of what's below.
True, yeah.
But you may recall that a few years ago, once we shifted to the iPad where you use your finger to press on a document and move it up to say, I want to see the bottom by dragging up, Apple changed the scroll bars so that when you move up, you know, it scrolls up too. They switched the direction to match what you did with your finger on tablets, you see? So you see the evolution of what do you do on the screen and the interaction that gives the user what they expect. What users expected changed. Originally with the scroll bar, we said that with the scroll bar, it's going to be like a scroll, like a long document. And this is the top, and this is the bottom. And if you move the little elevator to the top, I want to see the first page of the document. And if you move the elevator to the bottom, I want to see the last page of the document. Okay? Well, now it's reversed.
True, yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So once Bill Atkinson said to me that actually we invented one user interface. That's why we can change it, because we didn't imitate someone's interface. So if we imitate, we cannot understand what the fundamental thinking of that interface. But we actually make our own interface. So we can change it anytime if we find something new or something better. So I think that in the case of scroll bar, that philosophy is applied, I think.
Who said that?
Bill Atkinson.
Bill Atkinson. Okay.
Yeah, Bill Atkinson.
Okay.
Yeah.
you know that on the Macintosh, at the top of the screen, there is a menu bar, and you have drop-down menus from that. Bill Atkinson invented that.
Oh,
It didn't
The pull-down
exist.
menu.
And I remember looking at his notebooks, and he had pages and pages where he said, and he had sketches. What if we did it this way? What if we did it this way? What if we did it this way? Until he finally figured out that the menu bar at the top and the drop-down menus was a really great way to give access to hundreds of commands. Cut, copy, paste, italicize, shadow, make it bigger, make it smaller. All of those commands, we could make it easily available in a compact space by using the menu bar and the drop-down menus. He invented that.
Yeah.
Okay.
As I recall, on the Alto, you selected an object, and then the menu dropped down from the object that you had selected.
Yeah.
Which you could imagine was not as good.
No. Now, there was another thing. This is very common in technology, that someone develops something that's interesting, and other people are inspired by it to do something that looks superficially similar, but is actually different in an important way. So, for example, on the Alto and the Star, you could have like multiple windows, and you could have two documents, one on the right and one on the left, and they would join in the middle. Okay. Well, you could have two documents on the screen. That was brilliant. That was a huge innovation. Used to be you could only have one document on the screen, but now you could have two or three. But what Apple didn't know initially is that the screen was split like window panes in a window. You couldn't put one document on top or on the bottom of the others. Bill Atkinson wrote the software to make it possible for you to have windows that overlapped each other in layers, and then to bring another window to the front and have windows that moved around behind each other. Bill Atkinson wrote the software that did that. So we took the basic idea of multiple windows on the screen, and instead of having them like a window pane where you have a piece of glass and a piece of glass and they join in one plane, he said, what I really want is to be able to have as many windows as I want and as many layers as I want. Okay. So he took the inspiration and did something new and more wonderful with it. So that's part of why we can say we did not steal the Xerox PARC user interface. We were inspired by things that they did, brilliant things that they did. We were inspired, but what we did was our own.
Right.
But since you mentioned pull-down menus, back in the days of System 7, each updates of System 7 had like 100 or 150 new features. But you know, still all the pull-down menus, you know, were as long as, you know, half of the screen. So, you know, that means every new feature addition, you know, you are cutting out some old features to, you know, keep the menu short. And I was wondering, you know, there was no Steve Jobs back then, and who was doing that, you know?
I don't know. There was in System 7, there was a large team of programmers. We had a small human interface group. Sometimes one of us would get assigned to a project to help them with the user interface for it. Sometimes the programmers would listen to us and sometimes ignore us, because in that period of time, the programmers ruled. What the code that the programmer wrote, that's what we would ship. And the programmers would make the ultimate decision whether they believed in what the user interface designers would recommend. And I had some very frustrating times with programmers. I remember one time they were adding a feature to make it possible for applications to talk to each other where you couldn't see it. And they would send messages back and forth and control each other and stuff. And this was very powerful and very useful. Apple Events, yes.
Yeah.
And the manager of the user interface group asked me to go and take a look at that project and see if they needed any advice or direction. And I looked at it and I said, there's no security. Any application can control any other application, and the user can't stop it. So there's no protection against applications that misbehave, or users that have told their application to do nefarious, evil, bad, hacky things to people. And they said, oh, I guess we better put some security in there. So that was a good result, where I identified a problem that everyone agreed to.
Okay. Well, I'd like to ask you all, this is the mail from Alan Kay. Alan Kay, 2 years ago, I asked Alan Kay to make a keynote speech at ID 25th and 50th Symposium. ID 25th means the Mosaic browser was invented in 1997. So the commercial-based internet began at the time. And 50 means the demo of Douglas Engelbart. It was in 1968. So I asked him, and then his answer is very interesting. Well, he says, worth pondering that 25 years after the Engelbart demo, the Mosaic browser, when it appeared, was so much less, and some of the choices were discussed, and they are still there today. This is because the Mosaic people did not bother to know about Engelbart, nor did they pay attention to Hypergraph, nor even to the apps on the machines they used to develop Mosaic. How do you think about this comment of Alan Kay?
It's probably true, but I don't remember clearly enough the Mosaic browser from the standpoint of the things he's talking about. But it's very common for people developing new things to not know all of the things of past history that maybe you would want them to know to make the product that you want. I'm not sure what disastrous choices he's talking about, but I know one that I really hate. When I design applications, I want to be able to control the screen. I want to be able to have multiple windows of sizes I can predict. I want to be able to place things on the screen where I want them and to have them be consistent and well behaved and so forth. But with HTML, that was extremely hard to do.
Yeah.
And with CSS, CSS was a way to help control the layout of things on the screen.
Yeah.
But it was all from the standpoint of people who were making documents, not user interfaces. And now we're using CSS to lay out user interfaces. And I think is disastrous. So that's something I would think is disastrous. This history of the way Windows have misbehaved and not worked right when frames were developed and then iframes and so forth, and then now CSS. From the standpoint of building applications, not documents. Documents is a different story. But for the standpoint of developing applications, it's horrendous.
Well, as you know, you're even to the apps on the machine they use to develop Mosaic, which means next machine. Tim Berners-Lee invented www. So Alan Kay said that hypertext like this kind of today's HTML it was less important than hypercard, neural, next. He said, I think so.
Remember that when Tim Berners-Lee developed what became the World Wide Web, his original goal was for scientists to share documents. And so HTML is very document oriented, and that's fine. It's great. It was I think a brilliant innovation.
Yeah.
And it worked well for a while. But as HTML and web technology has developed and people start making applications with it, it's really hard to make a good application. It's really easy to make really terrible ones. You know, anyone who's tried to use Gmail, for example, in a web browser, or any of the web browser based productivity applications, it's really hard to make a good one.
I remember Alan Kay once called HTML DOS of the 90s.
It's a reasonable analogy, because DOS was extremely useful and was pretty good at what it did at the time it was created. But it, over time it became horribly obsolete.
Right.
And I think the same for HTML.
Yeah.
Now, HTML is still good as the basis for documents. I think, having web pages where you can scroll infinitely tall documents, and have videos and sounds and pictures and everything. I think that's wonderful. But not when you try to make applications with it.
So, well, in a sense, he said that we are DOS age of web, internet. Yes. Yeah. Hayasa, how do you think about it?
I didn't get.
Yeah, Hayasa, please comment. Please.
Those of the 90s?
No. Alan Kay.
Sorry, I didn't.
Alan Kay did not appreciate the mosaic people.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think, just as I told you before, I was watching at the General Magic movie last night, online. And, General Magic had this very, Daniel just mentioned, you also worked for General Magic for 1 year, but General Magic had this very novel idea of telescript, very intelligent way of communication. And, but the HTML or the web, or the internet invention in the mid-90s was simple sending and receiving of text. HTML is just text, and telescript was much more sophisticated way of communication. So when I saw the web, I also had same impression. It wasn't advancing people, but it's like going back a step backward.
Right. Daniel-san, how's it about Daniel-san?
Yes, comment about
the comment of it. Yes, Alan Kay's comment.
Oh, I never used the Mosaic browser, so I don't really know.
Yeah. So it means that it's Chrome. Maybe you will use Chrome browser, Firefox.
On the subject, I was going to say that on the subject of HTML, it took me a while to grasp what the Internet of Things people were talking about when they talk about RESTful interface, REST. You must know that, Bill, right?
Yes.
And as I understand it, it's representational state REST. Anyway, it's basically using the HTML commands to send commands to things, which once I understood it, I thought was a great idea.
Okay. So
now, maybe Mosaic made some bad decisions, but they also made some very good decisions. Mosaic was the first web browser that was popular, that was graphical, and integrated a lot of useful things into it. You could not only do HTML, you could also do FTP, the file transfer protocol. And I think there were other things you could do too, like Gopher and Archie and so forth. Earlier protocols that we no longer use for communication and information sharing. But it was one program that was understandable enough and usable enough by a wide variety of people to do a variety of useful things, all integrated together in one application. So that part was really outstanding and really moved the industry forward. Now, maybe along the way, well, for example, cars. as an example.
Mm-hmm.
Some countries drive on the right and some drive on the left.
Mhm.
Okay, wouldn't it be nice if everybody drove on one side or the other and everyone agreed?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but for the people who grew up in a country that drives on the right, they go to a country that drives on the left, everything is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Your thinking is wrong and your reflexes are wrong and so forth, and it's terrible. And
Yeah.
you know, maybe that's an analogy for Mosaic. They did something that, like a car, was very powerful and empowering, but they also made some decisions that over the long term have been problematic.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, I'd like to ask you all. Well, I'd like to ask all this question. What would Jobs think and do if he is alive now? Okay. So, anyone else? For example, Otani-san.
Yeah. So especially for this pandemic
Yes,
period.
yes.
Yeah. But actually, Bill-san said the Jobs was not good at voluntary work for the health cares or something like that. So maybe Jobs wanted to try something, but and maybe if he knows he is not good at that, he will gather people who are good at this kind of thing and do something for the world, I think.
Yeah. See, Hayashi-san, please.
Yeah, actually, I think it was back in 1996. There was a fireside chat at WWDC where Steve Jobs talked, and somebody asked the question, if Steve Jobs, he wasn't, working for computer industry, what would Steve do? And no, maybe it wasn't 96, but anyway, his answer was, he would be doing bio stuff, and maybe
Maybe.
that's right. Yeah, because as you may all know, bio. Well, it slipped my mind, but who was the guy who started MIT Media Lab? Nicolas Negroponte once said, Negroponte said, bio is the new digital, and there are so many new, as new bio innovation, and I was really surprised, that even Steve Jobs was interested in that, but if Steve Jobs would have seen, this how COVID-19 affected, the whole world, maybe he would be doing some bio stuff, and I don't know. But I can't imagine, him doing that.
Yeah. So next, Dan-san, Howard. Danya-san, please.
I think who would have believed that Apple would be making a medical device now? The Apple Watch is a certified medical device.
True. Yeah.
Steve had nothing to do with it. I give Tim Cook huge marks.
Yeah.
So in the late 80s, I was interviewed by the FBI because Steve was considering running for political office, and they had to do research on him to find out what he was guilty of. And given the disastrous state of our politics in this country, you'd have to think Steve would consider running for office again if he was healthy.
Yeah.
Now, the question is, would Steve wear a mask? I don't know.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe Steve would have his people develop a mask that everybody in the world wanted to wear.
Yeah.
Very intense. So scientific.
Do you remember? There was a story about Steve landing in the hospital bed late in his life, and he's complaining about the iron mask that they probably could design a better one. That was
Okay.